Alright, what is up guys? In this video, I will be showing you guys the best sensitivity settings you can use on controller. In this video, I will be talking about the most common settings that are used by pros, and then I will give you guys a range for each category. Afterwards, you guys can easily fine tune your sensitivity to whatever you would like. So let's get right into it. So in order for you guys to have the best sensitivity, I gathered settings from many top controller players that have been performing pretty well recently. Here is the chart that I made, and the players I chose to get settings from is Reet, Day, Mero, Calazo, Wavy Jacob, Furious, CRR, and Wolfies. I know that there are many more controller players out there that are performing pretty well, but these guys are pretty well known, so I decided to put them on this list. And I mean, the main purpose of this chart is just to see like what type of sensitivities the controller pros are using. And when I first looked at this chart, I was kind of surprised to see that there was 3 players with nearly the same exact settings. We have Day, Mero, and Furious all using 43 X and Y sensitivity, and even their building and edit modes are pretty similar. I'm pretty sure 43 is one of the most popular X and Y sensitivity because there's a lot of controller players outside of these 8 players that I have listed here that are also using around 43 sensitivity. Anyways, I will be showing this chart several times throughout the video, but if you do want to save it, you can just screenshot it right now, or I'll leave a link in the description to the image, that way you guys can see it better. But for now, I'm going to be moving from left to right on this chart, talking about each category and what the best settings are for each of them. So starting with the input curve, we actually have 3 exponential players on this list, as I mentioned. And I was kind of surprised that they weren't using a higher sensitivity because usually on Expo, it tends to feel a lot slower than linear to look around. Another thing I did notice about the exponential players is that they generally use a lower build and edit and a higher ADS than the linear players. So if you're ever wondering whether to use exponential or linear, that is completely up to you. As you guys can see from this chart, you can be successful either way you do it. It really just comes down to preference. Now moving on to X and Y sensitivity, and just in case you guys didn't know, when I'm referring to X sensitivity, that is horizontal, and Y sensitivity is vertical. Now, like I was saying earlier, I think 43 might be the most popular setting among controller players, but there are a few that tend to reach the 50s, so in my opinion, 40 should be the lowest you should go, and 55 should probably be around the highest. Now, if you go a little bit outside of those ranges, that is perfectly fine, as long as you feel comfortable using it. But generally, that is what most pros are using, and that's what I would recommend to you. And if you do use exponential, usually they use a slightly higher sensitivity. So if you do go over 50 and you're on exponential, you should still be fine. Now, a lot of players actually like to keep the same X and Y sensitivity, and there's also some players who prefer a higher X or a lower Y sensitivity, and vice versa. Now personally, I like to use a higher vertical. The reason being is when I'm building, I can easily look up and down when I need to place cones and stuff. But I also know there's players that prefer using a lower vertical sensitivity than their horizontal. And the benefit of that is that you'll probably be able to hit headshots much easier because it is slower. But whether or not you want to match your sensitivities or make one higher or lower is completely up to you as well. So let's just move on to the next one. So next we have build and edit multipliers. Generally, if you have a higher X and Y sensitivity than most players, then you will have a lower build and edit compared to most players. And if you have a lower X and Y sensitivity, then generally you will have a higher build and edit mode. Now the average build mode multiplier based on these 8 players is actually around 2, and for edit it is around 1.9. So I would say anywhere from 1.6 to like 2.4 would be pretty good. Now usually the players with the lower build and edit modes tend to move their crosshair a lot less than they need to, but if you're more of a flashy player and you like your gameplay to look cleaner, you can use a higher build and edit mode. But like I mentioned, if you are playing comp, I would recommend 1.6 to 2.4. I don't think there's really that much I need to explain for build and edit, so let's just move on to the next one. Next we got ADS sensitivities, and here we have another noticeable difference between linear and exponential players. Exponential players will usually have a higher ADS, and the average between all of these 8 players is around 10. So if I would have to give you guys a good range to stay in, I would say anywhere from 6 to 15. And nearly all of these players like to keep both the X and Y the same, besides Mero, who actually uses 6 and 8. And we also have 2 players that are actually outside of this range. Reet is actually using a 17 ADS, and Furious is using a 5, which is pretty slow. I don't really know how he uses it. That should pretty much do it for ADS. And the last thing I wanted to talk about is dead zones, and dead zones are probably the most easiest setting you can set. Basically, for dead zones, you want to have the lowest possible dead zone while having no stick drift. So if you have a newer controller, you will probably be able to lower this all the way down. But if you have a more worn out and used controller, then you might have to have a higher dead zone to avoid the stick drift. And then when it comes to boost and dampening time, I rarely see any pros like touching this. Usually most of them leave it to 0. There are a very few amount that do like to set these at very low numbers, so you guys can experiment with that and see if you like it or not. But generally most people like to leave these alone and at 0. So to review all of these settings, we have the most popular input curve being linear, the most popular X and Y sensitivities anywhere from 40 to 55%, edit and build mode from 1.6 to 2.4, and ADS 6 to 15%. And like I mentioned before, if you are slightly out of these ranges, that is perfectly fine. As long as you're comfortable with it, it is all good. These are just what most pros are using, and there's probably a pretty good reason for it. So when it comes to fine tuning your sensitivity, choose the starting point that you'll think will match you best and then adjust them from there. So let's just say, for example, I chose to start at 45 and 45%. There's 3 things I would probably test with this sensitivity. Now first, I would test how it feels, obviously. Then next, I would probably see how well I can hip fire on the sensitivity, because you know hip firing is pretty important with ARs and SMGs. Then I would also test building and editing. With each sensitivity that you try, you should try these 3 things and see what works best. If you feel like you want to look up and down faster when you're building, you can raise your vertical sensitivity. But if you feel like being a little bit more accurate in close range shotgun fights and lining up headshots easier, then maybe lowering your vertical would be better for you. Then when it comes to testing your build and edit modes, just see how consistent you can be with each of them. Now if you're already at a low build and edit mode, let's just say around 1.6, it is perfectly fine to try and raise it. If you're not even like good at it at first, that's okay. If you think you can become faster and more consistent with a higher build and edit mode, then just go for it. I don't think it's really that complicated to find your build and edit mode, so let's move on to ADS. When it comes to ADS, the best way to test your ADS sensitivity is to see what's going wrong whenever you're shooting at an opponent. If you notice that you're shooting far ahead of the opponent, then that obviously means you should probably lower it. And if you have a hard time trying to catch up to the opponent, then you should probably raise it. Now obviously this will vary depending on the range that your opponent is in, so at closer ranges you probably don't want to have a very low ADS, and if you like to go for longer range tags, then you don't really want to have a high ADS either. You want to have a good mix between every range. So I would hop into creative and just try it from different ranges. So you can try like 20 meters, 50 meters, 100 meters. Just see which one works best at all ranges. So those are the best tips and pointers I can give you guys if you're adjusting your sensitivity. Anyways, if you guys made it to the end of the video, try commenting below what sensitivities you are using. That way you can kind of compare with each other in the comments and see what you guys are all using. And if you guys have any further questions, let me know, and I'll see you guys in the next one.